There's a force within you that can build empires or destroy dreams, an energy that can elevate your consciousness to the heavens or imprison you in the depths of unconscious despair. This force isn't merely biological, it's not just physical. It's the very essence of creative life, the primal fuel that drives all human achievement. And yet most men live as slaves to this energy without even understanding that they carry within them the power to transform the world. Have you ever wondered why some men achieve everything they desire, wealth, influence, respect, true love, while others remain trapped in a never-ending spiral of dissatisfaction, addiction, and mediocrity? The answer isn't in luck. It's not in innate talent. It's not in external circumstances. The answer lies in understanding and mastering an energy that Napoleon Hill called sexual drive, but which goes far beyond what modern society has taught us to believe. This energy isn't the enemy to be fought. It's not the sin to be repressed. It's not the weakness to be denied. This energy is, in fact, the primary source of all creative power, of all extraordinary achievement, of all genuine transformation. But here's the paradox that consumes the modern soul. The more we try to satisfy it through instant gratification, the more it dominates us. The more we flee to superficial pleasure, the deeper we sink into the psychological prison of addiction. Napoleon Hill discovered, through decades of studying the most powerful and accomplished men of his time, that there's a fundamental difference between those who are dominated by their impulses and those who transform those same impulses into unlimited creative force. This difference isn't in the absence of desire, but in the conscious transmutation of that energy into higher purposes. Imagine for a moment that your sexual energy is like fire. Fire can burn down your house, reducing everything to ashes, or it can warm your home, cook your food, forge the steel that builds your tools. The difference isn't in the nature of the fire, but in the consciousness of the one who handles it. The unconscious man lets the fire spread uncontrollably, consuming everything in its path. The conscious man channels that same fire, directing its intensity to create, build, transform. You live in a time where this sacred fire has been profaned, commodified, marketed as a product of instant consumption. The instant gratification industry has built an empire on your inability to understand the true power that resides in your vital energy. Every click, every image, every moment of empty gratification doesn't satisfy your thirst. It only intensifies it, creating a vicious cycle that drains your creative force, your mental clarity, your magnetic presence. What modern society doesn't want you to discover is that all this energy wasted on empty pleasure could be transmuted into real power. Power to create authentic wealth, to develop genuine charisma, to build profound relationships, to manifest extraordinary visions. Napoleon Hill observed that the most successful men in all areas of life were those who had learned to channel their sexual energy into their projects, their ambitions, their highest dreams. But this isn't a journey of repression. This isn't a philosophy of denial or disguised puritanism. This is a journey of inner alchemy, where the lead of primal impulses is transformed into the gold of conscious achievement. This is the difference between being dominated by energy and mastering energy, between being a slave to desire and being a master of transmutation. When you understand that every sexual impulse carries within it the potential for extraordinary creation, when you realize that every moment of intense desire is actually your life force asking to be directed towards something greater, your whole life transforms. You cease being an emotional beggar, seeking crumbs of pleasure, and become an alchemist of your own existence, transmuting raw energy into concrete manifestations of power. Napoleon Hill discovered that this energy, when consciously transmuted, not only increases creative capacity, but also develops what he called a sixth sense, a sharpened intuition, an expanded perception, a direct connection to the creative forces of the universe. The men who mastered this art not only achieved material wealth, but developed an irresistible personal magnetism, a commanding presence, an inner strength that attracts opportunities and extraordinary people. Consider for a moment the great geniuses of history: Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, Napoleon Bonaparte, Thomas Edison. They all had one thing in common. They had learned to channel their sexual energy into their creative obsessions. Not by accident, but by a deep understanding of how the mechanics of human achievement work. They understood that the same energy that can be wasted on momentary gratification can be redirected to create works that transcend time. But you may be wondering, how is it possible that something as fundamental as sexual drive has become a psychological trap? The answer lies in the subtle but devastating manipulation that modern society exerts over your understanding of this energy. From childhood, you've been conditioned to believe that sexual desire is something primitive, something shameful, something that should be quickly satisfied and forgotten. You were never taught that this impulse is, in fact, the manifestation of your most powerful creative force. The psychological trap works like this. The more you try to satisfy the impulse through external gratification, the more it intensifies. The more you seek easy pleasure, the emptier you feel internally. The more you consume images, fantasies, artificial stimuli, the more your capacity to feel genuine pleasure diminishes. It's like a drug. You need increasingly larger doses to feel less and less real satisfaction. While trapped in this vicious cycle, your creative energy is constantly drained. Your focus is fragmented. Your willpower is eroded. Your personal magnetism dissipates. You become a shadow of what you could be, a man carrying immense potential, but living a mediocre life. Napoleon Hill realized that men who broke this cycle didn't do so through brutal repression, but through deep understanding. They recognized that behind every sexual urge lay creative energy begging to be expressed in higher ways. They learned to feel the impulse, acknowledge it, but instead of seeking immediate gratification, they consciously redirected that energy towards their projects, their visions, their ambitions. This transmutation isn't an abstract concept. It's a concrete practice with measurable results. When you stop draining your vital energy through empty gratification and start channeling it towards higher purposes, extraordinary changes begin to happen. Your mind becomes clearer, more focused, more creative. Your presence becomes more magnetic, more charismatic, more influential. Your ability to persevere through obstacles multiplies exponentially. But the transmutation of sexual energy goes far beyond practical benefits. It touches the core of the deepest existential question, who you truly are and what you're capable of. When you master this energy, you're not just improving your performance, you're awakening to your true power as a conscious and creative being. Think of sexual energy as the root of a mighty tree. If you constantly pluck the fruit before it ripens, the tree remains weak, unable to grow to its full potential. But if you allow the energy to accumulate, to concentrate, to intensify, it can grow and transform into a majestic tree that yields extraordinary fruit, wealth, influence, world-impacting creations, deep and meaningful relationships. Napoleon Hill observed that sexual energy is the most powerful of human emotions because it's the only one that can be directly transmuted into other forms of creative energy. When you feel anger, you can use that energy to fight, but it depletes quickly. When you feel fear, you can use that energy to flee, but it's limited. But when you feel sexual desire and learn to consciously transmute it, you have access to a nearly inexhaustible source of creative energy. This is why history's greatest leaders, artists, inventors, and entrepreneurs often had complex or consciously controlled sex lives, not because they were repressed, but because they had discovered the secret of transmutation. They understood that the same energy that can be wasted on fleeting pleasure can be transformed into lasting power. But here's where the journey becomes truly profound. The transmutation of sexual energy isn't just a productivity or success technique. It's a path of self-discovery that reveals the deepest layers of your psyche. When you stop using external gratification as an escape, you're forced to confront the emotional voids, the unhealed wounds, the unrecognized fears that were being masked by pleasure addiction. This confrontation with your psychological shadow is uncomfortable, but it's absolutely necessary for true transformation. Every compulsive sexual urge carries a message about something that's out of balance in your emotional life. Perhaps it's deep loneliness seeking genuine connection. Perhaps it's insecurity seeking authentic validation. Perhaps it's existential Boredom seeking real purpose. Perhaps it's repressed power seeking creative expression. When you learn to listen to these messages, instead of silencing them with immediate gratification, you gain access to precious insights into what your soul is truly seeking. And when you begin to satisfy these deep needs through constructive actions, building authentic relationships, creating real value in the world, developing your skills and talents, the compulsive urge naturally transforms into directed energy. Napoleon Hill found that men who mastered this art developed what he called personal magnetism, an intangible but unmistakable quality that attracts opportunities, influential people, and favorable circumstances. This magnetism isn't superficial, charisma, or social manipulation. It's the natural result of a man who has directed his vital energy towards higher purposes, creating an authentic and powerful presence. Imagine an inner warrior who, instead of wasting his strength on insignificant battles, conserves his energy for the battles that truly matter. This warrior isn't less powerful for choosing his battles wisely. He's infinitely more effective because his strength isn't dissipated, but concentrated and directed. This is the difference between the average man and the extraordinary man. The average man is ruled by his impulses, constantly reacting to external stimuli, wasting his vital energy on fleeting gratifications. The extraordinary man masters his impulses, consciously choosing how and where to invest his energy, systematically building the power that allows him to shape his reality. But mastery doesn't mean repression. This distinction is crucial because many men, in trying to escape the trap of sexual addiction, fall into the opposite trap of total repression. Repression creates tension, rigidity, and eventually uncontrolled explosions. Conscious mastery creates fluidity, directed power, and sustainable control. The process of transmuting sexual energy is like learning to play a powerful musical instrument. At first, you may only produce noise, uncontrolled impulses that create chaos in your life. With practice and awareness, you learn to produce simple notes, moments of self-control and conscious direction. With mastery, you can compose symphonies, extraordinary creations that are a direct result of transmuted energy. Napoleon Hill observed that this energy, when transmuted, not only increases creative capacity and willpower, but also develops higher mental faculties. The mind becomes sharper, more intuitive, more capable of perceiving opportunities and solutions that remain invisible to those who waste their vital energy. Consider the metaphor of a river. A river that spills into 1,000 different directions forms only swamps and marshes, lacking the power to move anything significant. But a channeled river can generate enough energy to illuminate entire cities. Your sexual energy is this river. Spread across 1,000 different gratifications, it creates only the swamp of mediocrity and addiction. Consciously channeled, it can generate the power needed to illuminate your entire life and impact the world around you. The journey of transmutation begins with a radical decision, the decision to stop being a victim of your impulses and start being the architect of your destiny. This decision isn't made once, but renewed daily, moment by moment, each time you choose the path of power over the path of easy pleasure. But this journey isn't solitary. Throughout history, extraordinary men have developed and shared specific practices for the transmutation of sexual energy. These practices aren't inaccessible esoteric secrets. They are practical methods that any determined man can learn and apply. The first practice is the development of body awareness. Most men live disconnected from their bodies, only noticing impulses when they're already at their peak intensity. Learning to perceive sexual energy in its initial stages as a subtle sensation of vitality and power allows you to redirect it before it becomes compulsive. The second practice is conscious breathing. Napoleon Hill discovered that breathing is the bridge between body and mind, between unconscious impulse and conscious choice. Specific breathing techniques can instantly transform sexual energy into mental energy, creating clarity, focus, and decisiveness. The third practice is directed visualization. Instead of letting your mind fantasize with images that drain your energy, you learn to create mental images of your goals, your visions, your future creations. The same emotional intensity that would be wasted on sexual fantasy becomes the fuel that powers your creative visualizations. The fourth practice is immediate action. The moment you feel sexual energy building, instead of seeking gratification or suppressing it, you immediately redirect it into constructive action, working on an important project, exercising intensely, studying something that develops your skills, creating something valuable. These practices, when applied consistently, create a transformation that goes far beyond the control of sexual impulses. They develop a kind of inner discipline that expands to all areas of life. The man who learns to transmute his sexual energy discovers that he can also transmute his anger into determination, his fear into wise caution, his sadness into deep compassion. Napoleon Hill realized that this capacity for emotional transmutation is what separates true leaders from followers. While most people are slaves to their emotions, reacting impulsively to every stimulus, the conscious leader uses their emotions as fuel for their creations. But the transmutation of sexual energy reveals something even deeper about human nature, our infinite capacity for conscious transformation. When you master the most primitive and powerful energy that exists within you, you prove to yourself that there is no limitation that cannot be transcended through awareness and directed discipline. This understanding creates an unshakable confidence, not based on arrogance or illusion, but on the direct experience of your power of self-transformation. You know with absolute certainty that if you can master this energy, you can master any challenge life presents. Transmuted sexual energy also develops what Napoleon Hill called a sixth sense, a sharp intuition that allows you to perceive opportunities, dangers, and possibilities that remain invisible to the ordinary rational mind. This intuition isn't superstition or magical thinking, but the natural result of a mind that isn't constantly drained by empty gratifications and can therefore operate on subtler levels of perception. Men who have developed this capacity often report extraordinary synchronicities, fortuitous encounters that change the course of their lives, sudden insights that solve complex problems, opportunities that arise at exactly the right moment. This isn't luck or coincidence, but the natural result of a mind operating at its full capacity, unburdened by the fog of addiction and compulsion. Consider the difference between a clouded mirror and a crystalline mirror. The clouded mirror may reflect vague shapes, but it cannot show sharp details. The crystalline mirror reflects with absolute perfection every nuance of reality. Your mind is this mirror. Clouded by constant gratification, it can perceive only the most obvious aspects of reality. Cleared through conscious transmutation, it becomes capable of perceiving nuances, possibilities, and opportunities that completely escape ordinary perception. This expanded perception translates into extraordinary practical advantages. In the financial realm, you develop the ability to perceive trends before they become obvious, to identify opportunities before they are discovered by the masses. In relationships, you develop the ability to deeply understand people's motivations and needs, creating authentic connections and genuine influence. In creative endeavors, you access levels of inspiration and innovation that seemed impossible when your energy was constantly being drained. But perhaps the most transformative aspect of the transmutation of sexual energy is the development of what might be called a magnetic presence. This isn't a quality that can be faked or superficially learned. It's the natural result of a man who has conserved and consciously directed his most powerful life force. This presence is instantly perceptible, even by people who can't rationally explain what they're feeling. It's a quality of focused attention, concentrated energy, directed power that commands natural respect and effortlessly attracts opportunities. It isn't superficial charisma or manipulative charm. It's the outward expression of genuine inner power. Napoleon Hill observed that all the great leaders he studied possessed this magnetic quality, and all had learned in one way or another to transmute their sexual energy into creative power. Not coincidentally, but because this transmutation is the foundation upon which all genuine power is built. The journey of transmutation also reveals the fundamental difference between pleasure and genuine satisfaction. Pleasure is fleeting, superficial, and always leaves a greater void after its passing. Genuine satisfaction is lasting, profound, and creates a growing sense of fullness and power. When you learn to find genuine satisfaction through creation, construction, the conscious expression of your potential, the addiction to superficial pleasure naturally loses its power over you, not because you have become repressed or negative toward pleasure, but because you have discovered something infinitely more satisfying: the pleasure of creating, of building, of expressing your power consciously and purposefully. This is true freedom, not the absence of desire, but the conscious mastery of desire. Not the negation of sexual energy, but its transmutation into higher forms of expression. Not the repression of impulses, but their alchemy into creative power. The man who achieves this level of inner mastery lives in a completely different state of being. He is no longer a slave to external circumstances because he has developed the power to shape his reality through focused inner strength. He is no longer a victim of his impulses because he has learned to be the alchemist of his own energy. He is no longer dependent on external validation because he has found the source of power and satisfaction within himself. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a process that requires patience, persistence, and self-compassion. There will be moments of relapse, moments of doubt, moments when old patterns will try to regain control. But each moment of conscious choice strengthens your capacity for transmutation. Each small victory builds upon the previous one. Each experience of directed power proves that transformation is possible. Napoleon Hill emphasized that the greatest battle any man can win is the battle against himself, specifically, the battle for conscious mastery of his most powerful energies. This battle is not fought once, but daily, moment to moment, through thousands of small choices that, accumulated over time, determine the destiny of a life. The man who wins this battle does not become perfect or without challenges. He becomes something far more valuable. He becomes aware of his power of transformation. He knows through direct experience that there is no aspect of his life that cannot be changed through the conscious and directed application of his vital energy. This awareness creates a confidence that goes far beyond superficial self-esteem. It's a confidence based on the practical demonstration that you can master the most powerful forces within you and direct them to create the life you want to live. It's the confidence of the alchemist who transformed lead into gold, not through external magic, but through the application of known principles and conscious practices. The transmutation of sexual energy also develops what might be called superior emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive and work with subtle energies both within oneself and in others. This capacity is invaluable in all areas of life, from intimate relationships to complex negotiations, from team leadership to artistic creation. When your own energy is not constantly in turmoil due to addiction and compulsion, you become capable of perceiving with crystal clarity the energetic dynamics around you. You can sense when someone is being authentic or manipulative, when an opportunity is genuine or a trap, when a situation is aligned with your higher goals or is a disguised distraction. This refined perception translates into superior decisions, more satisfying relationships, and an extraordinary ability to navigate the complexities of modern life without losing focus on your essential goals. But perhaps the deepest aspect of the transmutation of sexual energy is its connection to what Napoleon Hill called infinite intelligence, the universal creative source from which all genuine innovations, insights, and solutions emerge. When your mind is not constantly agitated by untransmuted impulses, it becomes a clearer receiver for inspirations and insights that seem to come from a source beyond the ordinary rational mind. Many of history's greatest inventors, artists, and leaders have reported experiences of sudden inspiration, of solutions that appeared fully formed in their minds, of insights that transformed not only their own lives, but all of humanity. Napoleon Hill discovered that these experiences were more common among those who had learned to transmute their sexual energy, suggesting a direct connection between the mastery of inner energies and access to higher levels of creativity and insight. This connection is not mystical or supernatural. It is the natural result of a mind operating at its full capacity, unburdened by the fog of compulsion and addiction. When all your energy is available for conscious creation, instead of being drained in unconscious gratifications, You naturally gain access to levels of performance and creativity that seemed impossible before. The journey of transmutation also reveals the deep interconnection between sexual power, creative power, and spiritual power. These are not separate forces, but different expressions of the same fundamental life energy. When you learn to consciously work with one, you automatically develop mastery over the others. Transmuted sexual power becomes creative power, the ability to manifest visions into concrete reality. Directed creative power becomes spiritual power, the ability to transcend apparent limitations and connect with higher possibilities. Integrated spiritual power becomes refined sexual power, the ability to create through conscious love and the purposeful union of complementary forces. This integration creates a whole man, one who doesn't live fragmented between different aspects of himself, but operates as a unified, purposeful force. This is the man Napoleon Hill described as capable of achieving any goal he can conceive and believe in. The path of transmutation isn't easy, but it's absolutely possible for any man willing to pay the price in conscious discipline and focused persistence. It doesn't require special talent, privileged connections, or perfect circumstances. It only requires the decision to stop being a slave to his impulses and start being the master of his vital energy. This decision, once made with absolute seriousness, triggers a series of changes that expand in concentric waves through all aspects of his life. Superficial relationships are replaced by deep connections. Mechanical work is replaced by creative expression. Passive entertainment is replaced by active growth. Compulsive consumption is replaced by conscious creation. Each of these changes strengthens the others, creating a growing momentum towards complete mastery. The man who started simply trying to control his sexual impulses discovers he has built a life of power, purpose, and deep satisfaction. But the most radical transformation happens in his relationship with himself. The man who once saw himself as a victim of forces he couldn't control discovers that he is in fact the architect of his own reality. The man who once felt shame about his impulses discovers that they are in fact indicators of extraordinary power that can be consciously directed. This shift in perspective, from victim to creator, from slave to master, from reactor to architect, is perhaps the most valuable transformation any human can experience. It's the difference between living the life that happens to you and creating the life you want to live. Napoleon Hill realized that this transformation is not only possible, but is the natural destiny of every man who is willing to take full responsibility for his vital energy and consciously direct it towards higher purposes. It's not a privilege reserved for a select few, but a potential that exists within every man who is willing to awaken to his true power. The energy that may now be wasted on empty compulsions is the same energy that can build empires, create masterpieces, transform lives, and leave a legacy that transcends time. The choice is yours. Remain a slave to impulses or become a master of transmutation. This choice cannot be postponed indefinitely. Every day of wasted energy is a day of unrealized potential. Every moment of empty gratification is a moment of lost creative power. Every decision to take the easy path of instant pleasure is a decision to fall short of your true potential. But also, each moment offers a new opportunity. Each impulse can be recognized as energy available for transmutation. Each desire can be seen as fuel for creation. Each temptation can be transformed into a chance to strengthen your capacity for conscious choice. The man who embarks on this journey not only transforms his own life, he becomes an example and an inspiration to other men who are struggling with the same issues. He becomes living proof that transformation is possible, that inner mastery can be achieved, that a life of power and purpose is not just a dream, but a concrete possibility accessible through the application of known principles. This is the legacy Napoleon Hill left. Not just abstract theories about success, but practical principles tested through the lives of hundreds of extraordinary men. The principle of the transmutation of sexual energy is not an interesting philosophical idea. It's a practical tool that can transform any life, starting today, starting now, starting with the next choice you make. The question that remains is simple but profound. Are you ready to stop being ruled by your energy and start mastering your energy? Are you willing to trade the momentary pleasures of instant gratification for the lasting power of conscious creation? Do you have the courage to face the discipline required to transmute the lead of your impulses into the gold of your achievements? This is not a decision that can be taken lightly or abandoned at the first sign of difficulty. It's a decision that requires the maturity of an inner warrior, the vision of an architect of destinies, and the persistence of an alchemist who knows that the transformation of lead into gold doesn't happen instantaneously, but through a precise and sustained process. The man who chooses this path chooses something much deeper than a simple self-control technique. He chooses a philosophy of life based on conscious personal power, total responsibility for his vital energy, and the deliberate creation of an extraordinary existence. He chooses to leave the herd of ordinary men who live as slaves to their impulses and join the elite of those who have mastered the art of conscious living. This elite is not defined by inherited wealth, social status, or external privileges. It's defined by an inner quality, the ability to transform raw energy into directed power, primitive impulses into refined creations, latent potential into concrete achievements. It's the elite of inner alchemists, warriors of consciousness, architects of their own realities. Napoleon Hill discovered that this elite exists in every era, in every culture, in every circumstance. They are the men who refuse to accept mediocrity as an inevitable destiny, who refuse to be victims of their own undisciplined energies, who refuse to waste their infinite potential on finite gratifications. These men share certain unmistakable characteristics: a magnetic presence that commands natural respect, a mental clarity that cuts through confusion and identifies the essential, an unbreakable persistence that transforms obstacles into stepping stones, and an unlimited creativity that finds solutions where others see only problems. But perhaps the most remarkable characteristic is its relationship to pleasure and satisfaction. While the average man seeks pleasure as an escape from reality, the man who has mastered transmutation finds pleasure in the very reality he is creating. He doesn't need to escape his life because his life has become a conscious expression of his creative power. This is superior pleasure, not the pleasure of escape, but the pleasure of expression, not the pleasure of consumption, but the pleasure of creation, not the pleasure of diminishment, but the pleasure of expansion. It's a pleasure that grows with time instead of diminishing. It's a pleasure that strengthens instead of weakening. It's a pleasure that connects you to your power instead of disconnecting you from it. The journey to this superior pleasure begins with an understanding that may be unsettling at first. You have been conditioned to believe that your impulses are more powerful than your conscious will. This conditioning is the root of all psychological slavery. When you believe you are a victim of forces you cannot control, you behave like a victim, and your external reality reflects this internal belief. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Your conscious will, when properly trained and directed, is infinitely more powerful than any unconscious impulse. The sexual impulse is intense, but it is limited and predictable. The conscious will is subtle, but it is unlimited and creative. The impulse can only dominate you if you allow it, if you believe you have no choice, if you accept the role of victim. The awakening of inner mastery begins when you question this fundamental belief. When you ask yourself, what if I actually do have a choice? What if my impulses are just raw energy awaiting conscious direction? What if I can learn to be the alchemist of my own experience? These questions crack open the psychological prison of conditioning. Through this crack, the light of possibility begins to penetrate. You begin to glimpse a life where you are not a slave to automatic patterns, but a creator of conscious patterns. A life where your energy is not wasted on impulsive reactions, but invested in deliberate creations. This vision of possibility becomes the fuel for transformation. When you can clearly see the difference between the life you are living and the life you could live, when you can feel the difference between the man you are and the man you could become, an irresistible force begins to move within you. This force is your own life energy reawakening to its original purpose, not the gratification of momentary impulses, but the creation of an extraordinary life. It's the same energy that was being wasted, but now directed toward its highest expression. The process of transmutation happens in layers, like the transformation of a rough stone into a precious jewel. Each layer of conditioning removed reveals more of the original power. Each unconscious pattern transformed into a conscious choice releases more creative energy. Each moment of inner mastery builds upon the previous one, creating a growing momentum toward complete mastery. The first layer is body awareness. You learn to perceive your sexual energy not as an impulse that dominates you, but as a sensation that can be observed, understood, and directed. This shift in identification, from being the impulse to being the observer of the impulse, is fundamental to the entire process. The second layer is emotional awareness. You learn to recognize the emotions that lie beneath sexual impulses: loneliness, boredom, anxiety, insecurity, repressed anger. Instead of masking these emotions with sexual gratification, you learn to confront them directly and transform them into fuel for growth. The third layer is mental awareness. You learn to direct your thoughts consciously, instead of allowing your mind to be dominated by fantasies that drain your energy. You develop the ability to visualize your goals, your projects, your future, creations with the same emotional intensity that was previously being wasted on empty fantasies. The fourth layer is spiritual awareness. You begin to realize that your sexual energy is a manifestation of something much greater, the fundamental creative force that moves the entire universe. This realization transforms your relationship with this energy, from conflict to collaboration, from struggle to conscious alignment. Each layer revealed brings not only greater mastery, but also greater responsibility. When you realize you have the power to consciously direct your life energy, you also realize you are responsible for the results that this energy creates in your life. You can no longer blame external circumstances, other people, or bad luck for the quality of your existence. This total responsibility may be intimidating at first, but it soon reveals itself as the greatest liberation possible. When you are totally responsible for your energy, you are totally free to direct it as you wish. When you are the sole determinant of how your life force is used, you become the sole determinant of the results it produces. Napoleon Hill observed that all truly free men had arrived at this same realization. True freedom does not come from the absence of responsibility, but from the total acceptance of responsibility for your own energy and your own creations. The man who accepts this responsibility discovers that he has access to inner resources he didn't even know he possessed. Discipline that seemed impossible becomes natural. Persistence that seemed unattainable becomes automatic. Creativity that seemed limited becomes unlimited, not because he has become a different person, but because he has removed the barriers that were blocking the expression of his original power. This is the great discovery of the transmutation of sexual energy. You are not trying to create something that doesn't exist, but removing the obstacles that prevent the expression of what already exists. Your creative power is infinite by nature. You are simply learning to stop limiting it through unconscious waste. The journey also reveals the profound difference between external discipline and internal discipline. External discipline is imposed by rules, social expectations, or fear of consequences. It's rigid, limiting, and often unsustainable in the long run. Internal discipline emerges naturally when you understand the value of what you're creating through your conscious choices. The person who develops internal discipline doesn't feel deprived when they choose to transmute their sexual energy instead of wasting it. They feel empowered. They don't feel restricted when they choose constructive actions instead of destructive gratifications. They feel free. They don't feel like they're sacrificing when they invest energy in growth instead of consuming entertainment. They feel fulfilled. This transformation in the experience of discipline is a sign that transmutation is happening at deep levels. When conscious choices start to feel natural and pleasurable, when constructive actions start to yield more satisfaction than destructive gratifications, when personal growth becomes more interesting than passive entertainment, you know you're operating from a new center of inner power. This new power center attracts into your life people, opportunities, and circumstances that resonate with your elevated frequency. You find that superficial relationships naturally dissolve, being replaced by deeper, more meaningful connections. Mediocre opportunities lose their appeal, being replaced by possibilities that challenge and expand your capabilities. Empty entertainments become unsatisfying, being replaced by activities that contribute to your growth and creation. This shift in what you attract isn't magic or supernatural, it's the natural result of a change in who you've become. When you operate from a place of conscious power instead of compulsive need, when you act from inner abundance instead of emotional scarcity, when you create from clear vision instead of reacting from confused impulses, you naturally magnetize experiences that correspond to this new quality of being. Napoleon Hill called this law magnetic attraction, the natural tendency to attract into our lives that which corresponds to our dominant inner state. When your dominant inner state is ruled by untransmuted impulses, you attract experiences that reinforce this pattern. When your dominant inner state is characterized by conscious directed power, you attract experiences that amplify and expand this power. Understanding this law makes every moment of conscious choice even more significant. You realize you're not just deciding how to use your energy in this specific moment, you're determining what kind of future you're creating for yourself. Every choice of transmutation instead of gratification is an investment in a future of greater power, freedom, and possibility. This expanded temporal perspective transforms your relationship with discipline and temporary sacrifice. When you can clearly see that forgoing momentary gratification is creating lasting satisfaction, that investing energy today is generating multiplied power tomorrow, that present discipline is building future freedom, conscious choices become not just easy, but irresistible. The person who develops this expanded temporal perspective lives in a completely different state of motivation. They're not constantly fighting against impulses. They're constantly being pulled toward a vision of possibility that's more attractive than any instant gratification. They don't need to force themselves to make constructive choices. They're naturally drawn to them because they can clearly see where they lead. This is the difference between fear-based motivation and vision-based motivation. Fear-based motivation is limited, inconsistent, and eventually depletes. Vision-based motivation is unlimited, consistent, and strengthens over time. It's the difference between being pushed by what you want to avoid and being pulled by what you want to create. Developing this vision-based motivation requires absolute clarity about what you truly want to create with your life. Not what you think you should want, not what others expect you to want, but what your soul genuinely desires to manifest in the world. This clarity can't be borrowed from others or copied from external models. It must be discovered through honest and courageous introspection. Transmuted sexual energy becomes the fuel for this discovery. When you stop draining your vital energy on superficial gratifications, you have access to the inner resources needed to explore the depths of your own authentic desires. You can invest time and energy in deep questioning, in courageous experimentation, in exploring the possibilities that truly resonate with your essential nature. This exploration often reveals that your deepest desires are far more extraordinary and ambitious than you had allowed yourself to acknowledge. Mediocrity isn't your essential nature. It's just the result of wasted vital energy and obscured vision. When you remove these limitations through conscious transmutation, you discover you're capable of conceiving and desiring creations that seemed impossible when you were operating from a state of drained energy. This awakening to your authentic and extraordinary desires creates a fundamental transformation in your self-image. You stop seeing yourself as someone struggling to control destructive impulses and start seeing yourself as someone building something magnificent. You stop identifying with your limitations and start identifying with your unlimited potential. This shift in identity is perhaps the most powerful aspect of the entire transformation. When you genuinely see yourself as a conscious creator instead of a victim of impulses, when you identify as an inner alchemist instead of a slave to automatic patterns, when you recognize yourself as an architect of realities instead of a reactor to circumstances, all your behavior naturally aligns with this new identity. You don't need to force yourself to act powerful. You act naturally from your recognition that you are powerful. You don't need to remember to make conscious choices. You make conscious choices automatically because you recognize you are inherently a conscious being. You don't need to discipline yourself to avoid wasting energy. You naturally conserve your energy because you recognize that you are a responsible steward of a precious resource. This is the ultimate mastery. When transformation becomes so complete, it requires no further conscious effort. When elevated choices become as natural as breathing, when directed power becomes your default operating mode, you're no longer becoming. Transformed. You are transformed. You're no longer becoming powerful. You are powerful. The man who achieves this level of integration becomes a transformative force in the world, not through preaching or proselytizing, but through the quiet example of a consciously lived life. His very presence challenges other men to question their own self-imposed limitations. His reality demonstrates that extraordinary transformation is possible, practical, and accessible. This is the true legacy of Napoleon Hill and all masters of inner alchemy, not just their own transformations, but their ability to awaken others to their own transformative potential. They proved it's possible to break the chains of compulsion and build a life of conscious power and directed creation. This proof is not merely inspiring, it's practically necessary. In a world that constantly promotes instant gratification, compulsive consumption, and mental passivity, living examples of conscious transformation become beacons of possibility for those ready to awaken from their own psychological enslavement. You can be one of these examples. You can be living proof that the transmutation of sexual energy is not just an interesting theory, but a transformative practice that can elevate any life from mediocrity to magnificence. You can demonstrate that genuine power comes not from external domination, but from internal mastery. That true freedom comes not from the absence of discipline, but from consciously chosen discipline. That lasting satisfaction comes not from constant gratification, but from conscious creation. The journey that begins with the simple recognition that you have a choice in how you use your sexual energy expands to become a complete transformation of how you experience existence. You discover you are not merely a biological being responding to impulses, but a conscious being capable of directing your own evolution. You realize you are not merely a product of external circumstances, but an active creator of the experiences that define your life. This realization is simultaneously humbling and empowering. Humbling because it reveals how much energy you may have wasted in the past, how many opportunities you may have missed, how much potential may have remained dormant. Empowering because it reveals that, regardless of the past, you hold in your hands right now the power to begin consciously creating the future you desire to experience. The present moment is always the point of power. No matter how long you've spent as a slave to untransmuted impulses, each moment offers a new opportunity for conscious choice. No matter how many times you've attempted transformation and failed, this moment is a blank page where you can write a new story. No matter how deeply you've identified with past limitations, in this moment you can choose to identify with future possibilities. This is the ultimate message Napoleon Hill wanted to convey. You have within you right now everything you need to begin the most important transformation of your life. You don't need to wait for perfect circumstances, external resources, or permission from others. You only need the willingness to recognize your own energy as the most valuable resource you possess, and the courage to begin consciously directing it toward the creation of the life your deepest heart desires to live. The energy flowing through you at this moment is the same energy that created all the great works of art, built all the lasting empires, solved all the significant problems, and achieved all the extraordinary dreams in human history. The only difference between you and those who achieved the impossible is the degree of consciousness with which they directed this universal energy that flows through us all. Are you ready to become conscious of this energy? Are you prepared to stop being its victim and begin being its master? Do you have the courage to trade small temporary pleasures for the large, lasting satisfaction of a consciously created life? The invitation is before you. The energy is available within you. The knowledge has been imparted to you. The only thing that remains is your decision to accept full responsibility for your own transformation and begin right now consciously building the extraordinary man you have the potential to become. The journey of sexual transmutation is not merely a technique of self-control. It's a path of awakening to your true power as a conscious and creative being. It's an invitation to step out of the crowd of ordinary men who live as slaves to forces they don't understand and join the elite of those who have become alchemists of their own life experience. This invitation is yours. This opportunity is yours. This power is yours. The only question that remains is, what will you do with it?